Chapter 27. Day 19, 15:30 hours. The wind is back. Halyard shackle opened. After a delightful morning sail and a successful sat phone call home, the afternoon trades got to blowing hard from astern, and it was time to reduce the size of the mainsail. Downwind like this, the boom is far out on one side of the boat, so the sail can catch the wind coming from astern. That puts pressure on the luff slugs, which makes reefing a little bit harder. Because when the halyard is released, the sail doesn't just fall down to the deck the way it usually does. It has to be hauled down hand over hand. That takes patience and some tugging. But we reef several times a day, and I'm used to it. I had the sail about halfway down when the shackle on the headboard opened and the halyard wire flew off to leeward, streaming like a pennant in the breeze. I watched it swing out and hang there, disbelieving. Then the boat rolled to the right and the halyard snapped back like a whip to wrap itself around the upper stays. As we rolled the other way, it found the whisker pole lift high above and wrapped itself around that. As the mast swung back and forth 40 degrees, the remaining wire spun triangles everywhere it touched as if an invisible spider were weaving a web overhead. For the first time in the voyage, my mouth went dry. The main halyard is the most important wire on the boat. Without it, the mainsail is useless. The worst thing that can happen to a halyard is that it go up the mast unburdened, because without the weight of a sail attached to it, it won't come down. That's why offshore sailors, and especially single-handers, always have a way to climb up the mast to retrieve a lost halyard. With a crew on board, the job is straightforward. Somebody gets into a bosun's chair connected to a spare halyard, and somebody else cranks him up with a winch. Climbing the mast is usually a pleasant job and necessary to inspect fittings and replace bulbs and navigation lights. Our mast is 44 feet high, and the view from up there is great. Traditional cruising boats sometimes have steps on the mast to make this job routine and to encourage people going up. A high vantage point is very useful when dodging coral heads, which are easily seen from up above. Some mast steps fold against the mast and some don't, but they all make windage, they foul lines, and they sort of look out of place on a light cruiser like Thelonious. It is quite possible for a single-hander to pull himself up the mast in a bosun's chair using a simple 3-part block and tackle. Why, with a 4-to-1 purchase, a child could probably do it. But that requires 200 feet of heavy line and the correct tackle, and besides, if you let go, you fall. For solo sailors, a mountain climbing rig works best, and skilled users can shinny up a taut rope in a few moments flat. The system uses a climbing harness instead of the simple seat of a bosun's chair. The climber rigs separate sliding hitches for the harness and his feet. He stands supported on the foot hitches, slide up the harness hitch, sit in the harness, slide up the foot hitch again, and by sitting and standing, you can work your way up the mast. Mechanical belay fittings called gree-grees can replace the sliding hitches, but the system remains a combination of sliders, brakes, webbing, and ropes that requires practice to use with confidence, and all of them need a separate safety line, which adds to complication. So, what system does Thelonious have to climb up the mast alone? None. Right. No mast steps, no 3-to-1 tackle, no gree-grees. And do you know why? Because during preparation, I had thought so much about the possibility of a lost halyard and considered so many means of climbing the mast single-handed that I had never been able to decide which to choose and wound up departing with no system at all. Meantime, the mainsail was about halfway down and flapping, the boat was rolling like crazy, the afternoon wind was building predictably, and our halyard remained wrapped tight around the upper mast and stays. I got the rest of the main down and furled. We continued under pulled-out Genoa jib as I stared up the mast, watching the lost halyard waving back and forth against the clouds. What a colossal screw-up. As the reality of the lost halyard set in, I sat down to wait. Yes, just wait. It was a trick I had been taught many years before when disabled 400 miles offshore in the Atlantic Ocean. Our big outboard rudder had come off in 6-foot seas and was now lashed on deck, a glaring display of why we were sailing in circles, unable to set a course straight for anywhere. My watch captain on that boat was Robert Harris, a well-known naval architect who used an FDR-style cigarette holder that tilted 45 degrees up whenever he smiled. "Don't worry, we'll fix it." But how, I wondered. "Oh," he said, "at the moment I have absolutely no idea." I noticed his cigarette holder cocking up, and what he meant was that there's always a way, but the way was not to be rushed. The process of solution was mysterious, but reliable. Well, hocus pocus, eh? But Bob Harris had been on the Murmansk run in World War II. He had watched torpedoed oil tankers explode and burn on either side of his freighter, and he seemed profoundly unconcerned to be aboard a sailboat that had lost its steering. And the next morning, our crew of 4, taking turns in a rubber dinghy, wrestled that 100-pound rudder back onto the stern of the boat in 6-foot seas, and after many experimental lashings and one split thumb, we had a jury rig that got us sailing in a straight line, sort of, toward Bermuda, sort of, until we finally got there. So if it breaks, just find a way to fix it. I studied the tangle up our mast through binoculars. Then I filmed it with a video camera. Then I went below and analyzed the footage in the video camera under zoom magnification. It took me about an hour to understand the root of the tangles. They looked pretty bad, but many of the tangles were redundant. If a few key turns could be undone, the rest might follow pretty easily. I still had a dry mouth, but it felt like Bob Harris was there, cigarette cocked, watching to see how I did. I would climb the mast somehow. I could start by rigging ratlines, rope steps on the support wires like the square riggers had. And that rig might get me halfway up. From there, I could try sliding hitches on the mast itself. I knew that as a kid, I could climb halfway up a mast like this, like a monkey, because sweaty feet cling pretty well. And I might be a bit old for that now. But 12 feet up, I could get a purchase on the horizontal spreaders on the mast and rest. And from there, I knew I could figure out how to climb higher, somehow. Or if I could get that far, maybe I could pull up a long pole after me and maybe snag the halyard with that. And if none of that worked, I would just sleep on it and start over the next morning with something new. I had time. I had a goal. I had necessity, the mother, father, and whole extended family of invention. The top of the mast was swinging back and forth through about 20 feet of sky, it looked like. As I climbed, that motion would attempt to throw me off the mast. This I could prevent with a line to bind me close to the mast all the time. Yes, the forces would be strong. Yes, it would take hours, but a means for resting up there could be devised. I would just be an inchworm, ignorant but determined. I was just sure I could do it somehow. I don't know where that confidence came from, but it was unnecessary. After another hour's thought, I taped a boat hook to a video camera pole, duct-taped a wire-snagging rig on the end, and eventually managed to snag the shackle and work it down to the deck. I used that same rig to place sender lines and painstakingly reverse the path of all the tangles one by one. And 6 hours later, we had a clear halyard, and we're back on course again. Could I have climbed the mast? Who knows? There's always another way. 100 other ways. Some revelation would come. Maybe a jury rig using a spare halyard, or sailing on under jib alone, slower, but still in the game. I didn't need to know in advance what the outcome would be. Outcomes get spit out of chaos like watermelon seeds. Just wait. It works. We're more than we know, and we're more than we need to understand. I did tie a safety line between the headboard and the halyard in case the shackle came open again. 20-30 hours, broaching, wind 25, speed 6. Dinner tonight was a cup of noodles because we're overpowered now, even under jib alone. A cross sea makes it hard for the stealth steering gear to keep us going straight. It's funny what you can get used to, being thrown sideways with sails flogging. You know, on an afternoon sail, our guests would be demanding helicopter rescue about now. But here, this commotion is normal. Make sure nothing breaks, check for chafe, get her back on course, lie on the bunk and hold on. Eat a cookie. Read Lord Russell on Thales, the first philosopher, who got so fed up with people saying he lived in another world that one winter Thales quietly bought up all the olive presses in Greece. And when the olive harvest came in, he rented them out at a high rate, just to prove to his tormentors that a philosopher could get rich any time he felt like it. That was a good outcome, don't you agree? 0230 hours. The middle of the night. Squalls. Fulmar. Another squall just passed over a hard, dry blast for only 10 minutes or so. There's no rain in these squalls, but they're full of silent streaks of lightning. I need to adjust the setting on the self-steering gear again out in the cockpit. How wonderful! As I was trimming the vane just now, the sky lit up with lightning, and a shape loomed above us. There, reflected in the glow of the stern running light, a solitary fulmar bird hovered 10 feet above us, its wings beating slowly. He didn't even look down, he only maintained his position over the cockpit. The lightning flashed again and again. White sails, white boat, white fulmar hovering. And beyond our whiteness was a vast encircling dark.